huge wow. How about Josh Ingram? And so much of what you said resonated with me, and actually, you know, you may find a little bit of overlap between what I'm going to talk about and what Josh talked about, and you're actually the reason I do the work I do. You're a good example of that, someone who walked away from something pretty extraordinary to start over. And I want to talk a little bit about the courage that that takes, and the fact that these halls that we're in right now are full of people who have done that for different reasons. And Mike Jackson, give it up for Mike for a minute, real quick here. I love anything that makes me rethink the work I do, and our gen ed programming here at the college has been a big part of the work that I've done since I've been here, and that is an awesome, fresh take on how we can do what we do better. So it has been a real pleasure to have been here for the day so far. I was making my coffee this morning, and my 10-year-old son, he came down the stairs and he was griping. You know, I was standing there at the counter grinding coffee beans, and my son, he says, "Oh, I don't want to go to school. God, do I have to go to school?" Now keep in mind, he's had the last 4 days off for snow days. And he's complaining, and I'm sitting there at the counter and I'm thinking, how can I talk about education and learning in a way that'll resonate today? And I'm reflecting on the work I do and what it is to be a student. And here's my kid saying, "Oh man, I got to go to school once a week." So I thought I'd share that. That was kind of funny. So I've been teaching for 13 years now. I figure that's about a half a career. And I've learned a lot along the way. And I have kind of a unique perspective, I think. So I've taught here at the college for the last 7 years. But I've actually had a lot of opportunity to teach all across the spectrum. I've taught kindergarten. I've taught elementary school kids. I was a high school English teacher for 5 years, and now I've been a college professor for the last 7. And, you know, in thinking about what I would talk about today, I spent a lot of time reflecting on that. And I was asking myself, you know, what do I have to share that comes from that experience? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about teaching and a little bit about learning. I really struggled at first when I became a teacher. I had one big problem, and it really plagued me. I really struggled with this. I felt as though at the end of the day, and at the end of the semester, and at the end of the school year, I never knew if I was doing a good job. It's very difficult in teaching. You get your grades, you know if you've done well, but I never was able to really measure or determine if I was having an impact, or at least the kind of impact that I wanted to have. And you know, I've worked in a lot of different jobs, and I've worked in construction. And you know, if you're building a house, at the end of the day, you can step back and you can see what you've accomplished. You can see exactly what you have got done. But when you spend your days teaching people, it's far more complicated. And like I said, that really used to bother me. But it doesn't anymore. In 13 years of doing this work, I've really come a long way in that regard and learned a lot along the way. And I want to spend my time today sharing with you the things that I have learned over these last 13 years, teaching people across all the different age spectrums. And I want to share that. And hopefully you'll find some value in that. So I have notes here. And my students in the room would say that's not fair, because I make them do a presentation with no notes. But I'm not being graded, so I think I can get away with that. So in telling you about the teaching work that I do, I also want to share with you a couple of stories about some of the best teachers I've ever had and how they have influenced me. Because the work that I do here at St. Lawrence College is very much a product of the influence that a few key people have had on me. And I want to encourage you to consider some of the people who have influenced you along the way as well. Now, what I've learned is that the people who have influenced me the most, I didn't realize until far later in my life the impact that they actually had. And I'll share with you the first example of that. Some of you know, I've disclosed to some of you that I was not a good student. When I was young, I made a lot of questionable choices, and I got myself into a lot of trouble. And as a result, I spent a lot of time outside of my principal's office when I was in elementary school. Detentions, suspensions, all kinds of trouble. And when I would find myself in those chairs outside my principal's office, I I never realized at the time what was happening, but I recognize it now. There was a man, the best teacher I've ever had, in fact, was not a teacher. He was the custodian of our elementary school. And so, you know, when it says on our TED board out there, who's talking about what today, it says that I'm talking about custodianship. And that may seem vague and not to make a lot of sense, but let me try to unpack this in a way that will make sense. His name was Lester Windover, Mr. Windover. Les. And every time I would find myself in those chairs outside of the principal's office, Mr. Windover, he would come along pushing his big broom. He had one of those great big wide brooms, always sweeping the hallway. And he would see me in that chair and he would sit down beside me. And he wouldn't say a word. He would just sit there quietly. And he would wait for me to start talking. And I would start to have a conversation with Mr. Windover. And come on in. I would start to have this conversation with Mr. Windover, and I would tell him what I'd done wrong. And I would talk about what I'd learned and what I should do differently next time, and he'd just patiently nod along. He might ask the odd question and have a conversation with me. And what I noticed about Mr. Windover, our school custodian, was that he never complained. He was a person with great humility, and he wasn't just sweeping the halls in our school. He was actually taking care of the hallways and the classrooms, but also the people in the building. He would never ask who made the mess. He would just clean it up. And he would never ask, you know, who broke the equipment in the classroom or who messed up the classroom. He would just fix it or clean it, repair it, or whatever needed doing. And when I think now about the impact that Mr. Windover had on me, and the other kids that I went to school with, you know, what resonates with me is the decision that he made not to be the custodian of the hallways of the school, but to be the custodian of the people within it. So, you know, I'd like to tell you that I straightened up as a result of those conversations with Mr. Windover, but that's not really the case. Fast forward a little bit to high school, and I was still making lots of questionable decisions. And I had a teacher in grade 12. His name was Paul Rook, Mr. Rook. And every morning I showed up to my English class in Mr. Rook's room, and I walked into the room and I'd put my head down on the desk because I knew that I had to be there, but I knew that that's all I really had to do. I wasn't going to have to do too much to pass the class. I just had to show up and do the minimal amount of work. And Mr. Rook, he never called me out. He never shouted at me. He never told me to get my act together. He never threw me out of the classroom. He just patiently, he waited me out. And one day in that class, he strolled into the classroom early one morning and he dropped a book on my desk. And I can remember today the sound that book made when it hit my desk, the plop that it made on my desk. And he said, "Take a look at this." And I said, "Sure, Mr. Rook, okay." And it took me about a week to open that book. I wasn't a reader. And when I did, I read the first page, and then I read the second page, and then I couldn't stop. He put a book on my desk that, although it took me a while to get to it, it set me on fire. It was the first experience in my life where I realized how powerful a story could be and what a book could do, how it could change you. And I knew immediately when I closed, flipped the last page of that book and closed it, that I was on a new path. Somehow in my life, stories and literature and books would be part of my future forever. And I'm grateful for that. And that has a direct, significant impact on the work that I've done ever since as a teacher. No matter what age group I've been teaching, I've never thrown a kid out of class. I've never shouted at anybody in my classroom. I'm content to wait. So that was the influence that Mr. Rook had on me. So now that I have what I honestly consider to be the privilege of doing this work, the honor to be able to be hopefully some source of impact on people somewhat similar to what those guys did to me. And you're not going to reach every person in that way, and I understand that. But I spend a lot of time thinking about how I want to do the work that I do and how I want to impact people. And so I want to share with you a little of what I've learned from working with those different age groups as a result. So from kindergarten kids, I've learned magic. I've learned, in my opinion, the truest form of magic that exists in our world. I really believe there's nothing more magical than a room full of 6-year-olds who are just genuinely inquisitive and excited to learn. Kids at an age where they don't yet have a shred of insecurity or self-doubt. And whoa! I didn't see that coming. Yeah. In all seriousness, though, I've learned the magic of the impact of a story, just telling those kids a story and the influence it can have on them. So I've learned magic. From middle school kids, you know, I've learned where the insecurity is born, where it begins, where the self-doubt starts, and where being cool begins to matter. And, you know, an unfortunate thing that we do in our culture is we often tend to judge people by demographic or by age group. We like to say those millennials or kids these days. And I've learned that, man, that is a fruitless effort. That's a pointless argument. Because so many of these kids that we see as angsty, somewhat rebellious people, if you wait them out, what I learned from Mr. Rook and Mr. Windover, if you just quietly wait for them, if you find a way to get beneath that surface, what's under there will amaze you every time. With every kid, every one of them has something under there that can knock your socks off. And what I learned from those teachers who influenced me, I learned that the tool to do that is a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. You can't shout at a kid to get through that. You can't punish them into straightening up. But if you're patient and if you let them know that you see the value and you see the potential, the minute you let someone know that you're genuinely interested in them, they become a different person. So, you know, that's one thing that I wanted to share, and I hope you'll consider if you find yourself in a situation where you're the one teaching someone something or sharing something with someone or being a leader in any capacity. So that brings me forward to teaching adults, the work that I've done now for coming up on a decade. From teaching adults, I've learned that this world can crush someone. It can take your job away, as Josh was talking about. It can strip your title. It can take your identity. It can rob you of the person you love. It can make you ill, take your health, and it can push you to the point of almost death. But I've learned that if you're able to survive that, and you're able to pick yourself back up and start over, and Josh, that's why what you were saying was resonating with me so strongly. If you're able to start over, these last 7 years for me have been full of people who have done that, and they've somehow managed to drag themselves into this college and learn some new skill or gain some new tools for building a brighter, beautiful future for themselves. And I've met so many people who are on their second chance or their third chance or even their fourth chance at life that it has been a great privilege in the work that I do to be able to be a small part of that. And in my mind, you know, that's the beauty of what happens here in this place. That's what our college is about, helping people who are on the road to building a brighter future for themselves. So I want to just encourage you to consider that, you know, for me, finding the wisdom of these people in my life has been a challenging effort. And in fact, if you're anything like me, it may be years after the fact that you actually recognize the impact that someone has had on you in that way. And so I want to encourage you to spend a little time thinking about the people who have influenced you in your life. What impact have they had, and how have they influenced the path that you've taken or that you're currently on? And I want to remind you that you're not here to have education done to you. The good stuff, you actually have to go out and find. And you have to have the ability to recognize it when it comes into your life. I want you to look for the moments where knowledge stops and wisdom begins. Because knowledge is easy. All of your teachers, they know stuff. We all know stuff. But it's the wisdom that those few people possess in your world who will influence you along the way that I want you to think about and recognize. So, as you go through the rest of your day and the days to come, I want you to consider how you influence the space and the people around you. My elementary school custodian, Mr. Windover, everywhere he went, it didn't matter whose mess it was, or whose problem it was, or who the person was, it was his responsibility. He took accountability for everything around him, just within the small space that he occupied. I try to do my work here that way too. Hopefully, if you and I have crossed paths at any point, I like to hope that you know me as someone who will help with whatever it is, wherever it is, whenever it is, why ever it is, and do my best to have an impact to make it better. And I want to encourage you to imagine, not just the impact of you choosing to be the custodian of the space and the people around you, but the impact that we could have if everyone agreed that you were the custodian of the space around you and the people around you. That's all I have. Thank you. Thanks for listening.